FNAF Plus was one of the coolest games to ever be announced in the franchise. And the reason for that is because it was supposed to be a long-awaited remaster of the classic Five Nights at Freddy's, but despite the game's announcement a decent while ago, we are still yet to have it, and there's been a couple interesting things to talk about with this upcoming title, including some controversy between the individual developer and the current FNAF developer Steelwool Studios themselves. Check out my Discord server link in the description. Also today I got my first play button and I did a face reveal too. Thank you guys so much. So basically, if you weren't aware, FNAF Plus was sort of a subcategory in a thing that Scott Cawthon himself created called the Fazbear Fanverse Initiative. This project posted by Scott on Discord was basically to try and give the many fan game creators a larger platform through himself. Scott had named a few fan game creators he was going to be working with. These fan titles were going to be created by the developers themselves. However, Scott was going to fund these projects to help them reach their full potential alongside with making merchandise. So we could be seeing these fan games that came out a long time ago finally making that huge step into becoming like a mainstream title. The games that are said to be being produced as of right now are Five Nights at Candy's 4, The Joy of Creation Ignited Collection, Pop Goes Evergreen, One Night at Flumpty's 3, and finally the main thing is the Five Nights at Freddy's Remastered Edition, or as other people call it, FNAF Plus. On a side note, there will be tons of other games in the future, but this is just the first lineup of them. The goal of this initiative is basically to put more light on these popular fan games, and I can totally see why. I mean, pretty much every single popular FNAF fan game is at the peak in quality, rivaling the real FNAF games themselves. Also, in terms of popularity for FNAF, this seems like a super smart idea. Fan games are debatably one of the biggest factors playing into the huge community around FNAF, and Scott clearly sees this. So with that being said, his plan with this is going to help keep the community alive and well with these fan games, especially in a day and age where we don't get official games very often anymore. Anyway, this brought a lot of life into the franchise once again. I mean, games like Five Nights at Candy's and One Night at Flumpty's have had so much success even outside of it just being a FNAF fan game, that on its own there's a decent bit of hype around them. Also, a lot of these fan games use tons of copyrighted assets in their older games, as they weren't built in the start to actually be fully fledged titles and franchises. But for those games that are like that, there's going to be a re-release of them to remove all that copyrighted stuff, so merchandising and such will be legally possible. But of course, the main thing around this is going to be that reimagined original FNAF game by FinSom. The game is presumably going to look a lot better and may even do a few new things with the original Five Nights at Freddy's to make it even more of a replayable classic. Because if we're being honest, with how good the first FNAF is, it definitely does have quite a few flaws that here in 2022 only make it replayable for the sake of nostalgia. I mean, every single Easter egg has been uncovered, the algorithm and the way that the animatronics work has been torn apart, and it's pretty simple. And I mean, the thing that made Five Nights at Freddy's original scary was how like weird and eerie and creepy it was, but when you know physically how everything works, it just doesn't have that effect. Anyway, after this announcement, of course, imaginably the development of all these things would begin to proceed. More specifically for this video, FNAF Plus would. A YouTube channel would go up by the same name along with other social media that would update information on the state of this remastered title. In September of 2020, the first tease would go up by the name of Connection Error. In the footage, we just see the camera going back and forth, giving an idea on what the room is going to look like, and eventually we get our first look as to what the animatronics might also look like, more specifically Bonnie, as she emerges from the dark and reveals the art style that would end up playing forward for this development. Something interesting shown in this first tease is that in the end, Bonnie seems to come after and grab the camera, ending the trailer, which may have just been for extra scares, but it also could point to some slight game mechanic changes with this game, because obviously in the first game that doesn't at all happen. Now, whether this or any of the other trailers is hinting at any actual gameplay is up for speculation. I would say most likely not, and this is probably just to tease things, just because we would go on to see tons of other VHS style tapes that were all just fun animations that didn't lead to any actual gameplay, but these could at least point to what the game aesthetically will look like anyway. But besides these teases, those are the only like full-blown announcements for FNAF Plus that we know. And to a lot of people, that actually could be the extent of your knowledge of the game. But with this game being announced over 2 years ago, has there been any other progress? Well, one of the best parts about these types of fan games is that the developer FinSom has actually been really transparent about the progress for this game up to this point. You just have to know where to look. The most information he gives comes from his own personal Twitter, where he breaks down and even requests ideas on how to go about the development process. So here's what we know. We have tons of pictures and teases that I won't go over all in depth just because there's so much, but one of the interesting ones I noticed was 2 different UIs for the game, one being in a futuristic style and one in a more retro. And when posting this, FinSom actually asked in a poll what the fans wanted the most, and with a majority vote, FinSom sided with the retro style, so that's cool that there's some fan interaction in this. It's also cool that in the end he said he would include both of the UIs, along with some some extra ones adding up to a total of 4. Also, in terms of merchandise for this title, if you were curious, some yet to be licensed merchandise was created and people thought it was for this remaster, but FNAF did respond to this and said that there's nothing in production, and that if there ever was any, it would come out after the title released. Anyway, in terms of the progress in this game, we are relatively close to the release, but it's not like it's on the horizon or anything. FNAF has been developing what the office will look like and such, not to mention, of course, all the UI stuff, which is great. Most of these things are pretty fundamental, so we aren't quite in the finishing touches or anything, but there still is significant progress. I didn't see too much about the actual animatronic figures themselves or sets, which kind of leads me to believe that this game isn't aesthetically focused just yet, but I do believe we are within the coming months of the title. In terms of what to expect, all I can say is there's a whole lot. FNAF went on a Twitter thread explaining all the different design changes with the game that were going to be implemented, showing tons of cool and interesting ways to change the game visually. Also, they mentioned that the implementation of these factors was actually going to be halted until they could make the character animations. And honestly, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but for me, the idea of just seeing a little movement on the cameras for this game would be incredibly sick. Although by animations, they probably just meant in reference to the jump scares or Foxy running down the hall, but I can hope. I'm expecting this title to come out this year, and I honestly cannot wait. It'll be absolutely huge for the FNAF community, so I can only imagine everyone else is excited as well. But at the beginning of this video, I actually mentioned there was a little bit of drama between FNAF and Steelwool, which is weird considering their indirect partnership that's happening right now. But what exactly happened? Well, to recap, the most controversial FNAF game to ever release in FNAF Security Breach came out in December of last year. Tons of people saw so many problems with this game. It was buggy, rushed, and was incredibly disconnected from what the FNAF franchise was up to that point. Out of all the people to express their disappointment with this title, the most prominent figure to release a statement would actually be FNAF. And in a post, they had shown disgust in the brand new title. This statement even goes on as far as to say they're no longer a fan of FNAF as a whole. This was one of the weirdest and most confusing statements I've ever seen, just because this sort of made people wonder the state of FNAF Plus after this. FNAF had reassured us that the plans for FNAF Plus were still there, but it definitely was sort of hard to believe, honestly, since, I mean, how can you make a fan game working with developers you no longer even support? A concern I personally had with the title was that even if this FNAF Plus were to be released, I didn't know if it would actually be any good, because with all this drama and how much FNAF doesn't seem to like Five Nights at Freddy's anymore, there may have been a lack of inspiration. Luckily enough for us, FNAF did actually respond once again to the effective security breach on FNAF Plus in an interview though, and we did get some more promising news. In this interview, FNAF was asked the effect of this FNAF disconnect on their own title, and to our surprise, FNAF had actually said the disconnect was a net positive, because instead of having to focus on FNAF and its legacy, they're able to put 100% of their focus on FNAF Plus, and now they actually have the creative freedom to build upon the things they thought were missing from the newer titles. So while this is all taking forever, I wouldn't really be worried about anything for FNAF Plus along with the other FNAF Fanverse games, which I may make a separate video on later. But if you want to hear about even bigger and crazier FNAF content coming soon, watch this full recap on the FNAF movie information. There's a huge update in there. Anyway, subscribe and peace.